Ladies and gentlemen, patriots and others, it's my pleasure to talk to you this evening because the question of debt is an existential problem. I began writing about odious debt in 2008 when we had, when I was seeing the problem really morphing into a major problem. I began publishing in the newspapers. I did a number of articles, but nobody seemed to listen. And that time we're looking at a very small figures, comparatively small figures, but still figures that were affecting the development of the country. Because every money that goes to service debt is money lost from the Kenyan economy. It's money repatriated out. And debt, first of all, debt is not a bad thing. Debt is a good thing, and you can borrow and develop and go. I'm in business, I borrow, I invest, I pay back, and I continue and I grow. But when you borrow, when you use borrowing to steal, when the state begins borrowing to steal, then the question becomes who pays back? There's the question of public trust, the doctrine of public trust. What happens? And that's why you find that the drafters of the new constitution went out of their way to include chapter 12 in our constitution. Many constitutions don't have the equivalent of chapter 12 because chapter 12 is a technical issue on public finances, how public money should be handled, in much lower laws than the constitution. But in our case, because of what we have gone through, we decided to codify it in the constitution, say we're going to this is how public money is going to be handled. And the chapter 12 is very prescriptive. It states what should be done and what should not be done. And so we decided to say, okay, we have had this question of odious debt right from the Kenyatta 1 era. Like now, if you look at our books, the debts we are paying today, we are still paying today. If you go to our debt register, you'll find out the Kenren fertilizer, the first major scandal that we ever had, that happened in 1974 under Mwai Kibaki, when, according to the books that we have in Kenya, we have got a big fertilizer factory in Dagoretti, which cost us billions of shillings in those days, in the 74, hundreds of millions of shillings, equivalent to tens of billions today. We are still paying that money. If you go to our debt books, if you look at the repayment you make, you will find something called Kenren fertilizer. It is not the government who borrowed, but people close to the government went and took heavy loans. The government guaranteed them. They went and bought apartments in France and elsewhere. They never serviced the loan. The government of Kenya ends up paying the loan. That loan is being paid. That's an example of an odious debt that we are paying as sovereigns. But then the law was not very clear at the time, although there were laws about the state, about public property being protected and all that. But it did not have the clarity that you find now in the 2010 Constitution, when it's a constitutional imperative that you cannot borrow outside the budget. Article 220. And an article that may not be very articulated is Article 221, Clause 5, that says the estimates of revenue and the estimates of expenditure will be taken to Parliament and subjected to public participation. So if the loans are not in the budget, then the public and the Parliament are not able to deliberate on them. And so these loans, who is borrowing them and for what? Then you'll find that because all borrowing is now tied to development, to asset, to acquisition of capital assets, paying a doctor's salary, employing doctors in hospitals in Kapenguria or in Busia or in Moyale, it may improve, it may be development, may develop the lifestyle of the people, but that's not development. That is really recurrent. Buying medicines, whatever, that's recurrent expenditure. But maybe building the hospital would be a capital expenditure. You're building, you're acquiring, you're building up assets. So when you look at that, if you use that paradigm to look at it, you'll find that the constitution, under the current constitution and the Public Finance Management Act, only money that is going to make to acquire for development or to which is defined as acquisition of capital stuff is what is approved. Domestic borrowing is not allowed, except overdrafts that you call treasury bills to stabilize cash flow. They must be repaid within a year. But we said all the same, let us leave that old stuff aside. What happened before the constitution came? Let us use the cutoff date of 2010. And even when we cut off 2010, let us leave Kibaki out. Let us come and say, who are the people who implemented the new constitution properly? These are people who were elected with the county government and whatever. Then you find it is President Uhuru Kenyatta and the current President William Ruto. These are the three who began the new constitution. So he says then use them to see how the debt issue has been handled. Now, when they came into power, Kenya had to talk about some share is about 2.7, isn't it? 2.7 trillion. When Kibaki handed over power, it was 1.8. 1.8. It's about 2 trillion shillings that was there. Now we are talking about debts that are closing towards 13 trillion today. And within that construct, we have that debt, but you have paid about 8 trillion. You have paid out 8 trillion. When you look at it, of the 8 trillion, only 5, we can only trace, the only amount we can trace is about 5 trillion. We cannot trace much money in the money that the legitimately approved debts, plus their costs. When we did our mathematics, we found that it was about 5 trillion. We have paid out 8 trillion. So we have overpaid what we are supposed to pay by more than 3 trillion. By 5 trillion, that's what Michelle is saying. And for the figures are a bit... now, we have overpaid by so much, and then you go to the debt register, you still find that we are owing money, yet they should be refunding us money. Then you begin wondering, why is this money? You find that the figures between the central bank and the treasury don't tally. The central bank has got a much higher amount of debt than the treasury. So we said, okay, let us then look at the books. And we are able to look at it from the face of it. You can see that 6.7 trillion, 6.9 trillion is not available. Of that, 4.6 is under President Uhuru Kenyatta, and 2.3, that our case, our analysis ended on 30th of November, 2024. That's when we finalized our data and filed the case. As by that date, William Ruto had incurred odious debts of his regime had incurred odious debts of 2.3 trillion. So we decided to go to court and say, okay, this money we cannot pay. Our people, our mamambogas and ourselves cannot pay this money. The regime should pay this money. We went back into antiquity and we find that the doctrine of odious debt was a doctrine that came up when the Americans kicked the Spaniards out of Cuba. You remember when the Spanish empire imploded, they could not pay that huge military, they could not do whatever, they were not producing. They stopped producing, they were now buying things from the English, they were buying things from elsewhere, just like what is happening in the US now. When the Spanish empire imploded, the Americans took up some islands, and they repeated the debts in Cuba, in Colombia, in wherever. They say they can't pay debts which the Spaniards borrowed and never benefited the people of Cuba. So that begins informing the concept of the international law on odious debt, which is largely not codified, but it's a moral principle largely that guides a lot of stuff. So from that kind of arrangement, we decided to go ahead and sue the former president. You know, under the law today, you cannot directly sue the sitting president. The decision that had been done by Justice Ngugi, Jairus Nga, and others that you could sue the president was overturned by the Court of Appeal. And so you can sue him through the Attorney General, which we did, and indicated we were suing him through the Attorney General for that liability. And the good thing you might ask yourself, why would the Constitution in chapter 12, that's article 226, clause 5, apportion personal liability to anybody who results in the loss of public funds. So invoking that principle, which we know was put there because of cases like this, and because of our bad history whereby public officials have stolen from the people, is like having a maid who eats the cerelac of the baby and the baby gets kwashako. So these guys who are put in charge of this country have stolen from us, and now we are left high and dry.